Right now, underneath Southern California, something is happening that has not happened in over 1,000 years. The two most dangerous fault lines in the state have been silently charging up for over 168 years. No major earthquake, no release, just pressure building day after day, year after year, for longer than anyone alive has been on this planet. And in June of 2026, a team of scientists finally measured how much pressure is down there. They ran 1,000 years of earthquake data through a physics model, and the numbers that came out stopped people in their tracks. The stress on the fault right now is higher than anything in the last 1,000 years of records. Not close to the record. Past it. On every single section they measured. Over 23 million people live in Southern California. The greater Los Angeles area alone has about 13 million. San Bernardino, Riverside, the Inland Empire, the Coachella Valley, all of it sitting on top of or right next to these faults. And the ground underneath them has more stored energy in it right now than it has had in a millennium. But that is not even the part that has scientists worried the most. There is a spot in the mountains northeast of Los Angeles called Cajon Pass. If you have ever driven from LA to Las Vegas, you went through it. It is a break in the mountain range, maybe a few miles wide, with a freeway running through it, a railway underneath it, gas pipelines, power lines, fiber optic cables, fuel lines, and water pipes all packed into the same narrow corridor. About 160,000 vehicles drive through it every single day. And underneath all of that, hidden under the asphalt and the train tracks and the pipelines, those two massive fault lines meet. The San Andreas and the San Jacinto. Right there, right under the freeway. Scientists just gave this spot a new name. They are calling it an earthquake gate. A gate that sometimes blocks earthquakes from spreading, and sometimes swings wide open and lets them rip through both fault systems at once. And the reason California is in serious trouble right now is not just that the faults are loaded to a 1,000-year high. It is that the gate, according to this model, is currently open. To understand what that means, you need to hear what happened the last 2 times an earthquake reached this spot. Because the same place, with the same faults, produced 2 completely opposite results. In January of 1857, one of the biggest earthquakes in American history ripped through Southern California. The ground tore open for over 200 miles. In some spots, the land on one side of the crack jumped sideways by almost 30 feet. That is the length of a school bus in a matter of seconds. Rivers ran backward. The Kern River was thrown so hard it actually reversed course and flowed upstream. Water ran 4 feet deep over its banks. Tulare Lake, which used to be one of the biggest freshwater lakes west of the Mississippi, had its water thrown shoreward so violently that fish ended up stranded miles from the lake on dry ground. Trees were ripped out of the ground and swallowed into the dirt. The solid ground rolled like waves on the ocean. In Los Angeles, people stumbled into the streets and dropped to their knees. A rancher, standing by a lake, later said the water splashed up to his knees and the trees whipped around so hard that he jumped on his horse and ran. The shaking lasted between 1 and 3 minutes. Think about that. 3 minutes of the ground under your feet not being solid. It was one of the strongest earthquakes ever recorded in the United States. As big as, or maybe even bigger than, the famous 1906 earthquake that destroyed San Francisco. The only reason 1857 did not become one of the worst disasters in American history is that California had barely anyone living there at the time, about 350,000 people in the whole state. Most of the land the earthquake tore through was completely empty. The official death toll was incredibly low. But here's the part that actually matters for what is coming. That massive earthquake, with all that power, all that force, came roaring down the fault line and reached Cajon Pass. And it stopped. Not because it ran out of energy, not because the fault ended, not because there was some kind of wall in the ground. There were hundreds of miles of loaded, ready, stressed out fault sitting right on the other side of that pass. The earthquake just could not get through. Now go back 45 years before that. December of 1812, a different earthquake hit the same exact spot. And this one did not stop. It blew right through Cajon Pass like it was not even there. It jumped from the San Andreas fault to the San Jacinto, and it turned into one massive event across 2 different fault lines at the same time. Same place, same faults, 2 completely opposite results. One of the biggest earthquakes in American history hit the gate and bounced off. A smaller one, 45 years earlier, walked right through like nothing was there. This is the kind of mystery that drives scientists crazy, because if bigger earthquakes push through, then 1857 should have been the one to cross, and 1812 should have been the one to stop. But it was backwards. The stronger one stopped, the weaker one went through. So clearly raw power is not what decides it. Something else is going on. Something about the state of the ground itself at that exact moment. For over 150 years, nobody could figure out what that something was. What was different about 1857 compared to 1812? What controls this gate? Why does this one spot in the mountains sometimes act like a wall and sometimes act like an open door? And here is why this is not just an interesting puzzle. It is the most important question about the safety of Southern California that exists. The southern part of the San Andreas Fault has not had a major earthquake since 1857. That is over 168 years of quiet. And the section south of Cajon Pass, the one heading down toward San Bernardino and the Coachella Valley, has not had a big one since around 1690. That is over 330 years. But just because the fault is quiet does not mean it is calm. It means the exact opposite. Every single day for 168 years, the pressure under the ground has been growing, slowly, invisibly, without any sign at the surface. The silence is not peace. It is energy being stored. And it is not going away. It is piling up. Whether the next earthquake is a very bad day or something in a completely different category depends almost entirely on what happens at Cajon Pass. If the next rupture stops there, you get one earthquake on one fault, terrible but contained. If it crosses through, you get two fault systems breaking at the same time. More ground shaking, more area covered, more cities hit, and a path that runs right through some of the most populated areas in the country. The 2026 study figured out what controls the gate. They figured out why 1812 crossed and 1857 stopped. And when they looked at the conditions right now, the answer was the one nobody wanted to hear. The gate looks open. If you want to know how they figured that out and what it actually looks like if it happens, keep watching. I promise you, the second half of this gets wild. And before we go further, I need to say this. Everything I'm about to show you is real. This is not a movie. And the hard truth is, most families are not even a little bit ready for what could happen. That is why I put together something called the Family Disaster Survival System. It is a step-by-step guide that covers everything. How much water you actually need. How to communicate when the phones go down. What to do in the first 72 hours when nobody's coming to help you. How to keep your kids safe when everything around you is falling apart. The link is in the description and pinned in the top comment. I would grab it now because by the end of this video, you are going to wish you had it yesterday. Section 1. The slowest fight on Earth. Before we get to the numbers that scared everyone, you need to understand how this fault actually works. Because most people have the completely wrong picture in their heads. When people hear San Andreas Fault, they think of a giant crack in the ground that is going to split open and swallow cities whole. Lava pouring out, buildings sliding into a canyon. That is pure Hollywood. It does not work like that, not even close. What the San Andreas actually is might be even more terrifying because it is real. The surface of the Earth is broken into huge pieces called plates. These are not small. They are continent-sized slabs of rock, thousands of miles across, and they float on top of a layer of hotter, softer rock underneath. And they are always moving, very, very slowly. Southern California sits right on the edge where two of these giant plates meet. On one side, you have the Pacific Plate. On the other side, you have the North American Plate. And they are not crashing into each other head-on. They are not pulling apart. They are sliding past each other, sideways, like two people trying to squeeze past each other in a narrow hallway, shoulder to shoulder, going in opposite directions. Except these two people are continent-sized slabs of the planet. And here is the speed they are moving at, about 2 inches a year. That is roughly how fast your fingernails grow. So we are talking about two massive pieces of the Earth grinding sideways past each other at fingernail speed. You might think, okay, 2 inches a year, that is nothing. Why is that dangerous? And you're right that it sounds like nothing. But here's the problem. They are not actually sliding smoothly, they are stuck. The rocks along the fault are rough. They are pressed together with unbelievable force. And friction locks them together like two pieces of sandpaper pushed flat against each other. If you have ever tried to slide two pieces of sandpaper past each other when they are pressed together hard, you know they do not slide, they grip, they hold. So what happens is the deep rock underneath keeps moving. The forces driving those plates are so powerful that nothing stops them. But the surface layer, the top part of the crust, stays locked, frozen in place by friction. And that creates a huge problem because the rock at the surface is now being pulled in one direction while it is stuck. Every year it gets pulled a little more. Every year the strain builds a little more. And the rock does not show it. From the surface, everything looks normal. There's no crack widening. There's no rumble. There's no warning light. Just quiet ground that is slowly and visibly being loaded with energy. Think about bending a wooden stick. You grab both ends and push. At first nothing happens. The stick looks totally fine, but inside, the wood fibers are stretching. Energy is building up. You can feel the stick getting harder to push. You keep going. Still nothing visible. More energy. More strain. The stick looks the same from the outside, but inside it is screaming. And then it breaks. Not slowly, all at once. Every bit of energy that was building up over minutes of slow, steady pressure comes out in a fraction of a second. Snap. That snap is an earthquake. The fault works the same way, just on a much bigger scale and a much longer timeline. Instead of minutes, the energy builds for decades, for centuries. Nothing happens on the surface, no visible sign, no sound. And then one day, somewhere along the fault, the friction finally loses the fight against all that stored up strain. The rocks slip, and all that energy, all those decades of fingernail speed movement that was being held back, releases in seconds. The ground on one side of the fault lurches sideways. In 1857, that lurch was up to 30 feet in some places. 30 feet in a couple of seconds. And the energy radiates outward from the break as seismic waves, which is what you feel is shaking. And here is the part that makes big earthquakes truly different from small ones. Not just worse, different in kind. In a small earthquake, a little patch of rock slips, maybe a few hundred feet of fault. The shaking lasts a second or two, over before most people can even react. You feel a jolt, things rattle, and then it is done. But in a big earthquake, the break does not happen everywhere at once. It starts at one spot and then tears along the fault, like a zipper being pulled open, fast, about 2.5 miles per second. So the shaking arrives in one city while the fault is still tearing open somewhere else, and it does not stop until the tear stops. For an earthquake the size of the 1857 event, that means shaking that lasts between 1 and 3 minutes. Count to 90 right now, slowly. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. And while you're counting, imagine the floor under your feet is shaking the entire time. Not a gentle rattle. Violent movement, walls cracking, things falling off shelves, the sound of a building groaning. And it is not stopping. You are at 30 seconds, and it has not stopped. 60 seconds, and it has not stopped. That is what a large San Andreas earthquake feels like. People who survive big earthquakes do not usually talk about how violent the shaking was. They talk about the length. That is the part that stays with them for the rest of their lives, not the strength, the duration, the feeling that it should have stopped by now, and it has not. Here's one more thing to understand before we get to the gate that really puts all of this in perspective. Los Angeles and San Francisco sit on opposite sides of this fault. They are literally on different plates. LA rides the Pacific plate, San Francisco rides the North American plate, and because those plates keep sliding, LA and San Francisco are actually getting closer together. At fingernail speed, in about 20 million years, they will be side by side. Nobody has to worry about that part. 20 million years is a long time. The dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago, for reference. We have some time. But here is why I bring it up. 2 inches a year does not sound like much. But over 168 years, 2 inches a year adds up to about 28 feet of movement that should have happened but has not, because the surface is locked. 28 feet of sideways motion that is stored in the rock right now as strain, waiting to come out. That is why the 1857 earthquake, when it finally released, moved the ground by up to 30 feet in some places. It was releasing over a century of backed up movement all at once. And we are now past the point where 1857 started. We have had more years of loading than the fault had before it broke the last time. Nobody has to worry about that part. Just kidding. That is exactly the part to worry about. The part to worry about is the southern section of the fault. It has been locked and loading since 1857. Every single day for over 168 years. A little more strain. Every year a little more energy packed into the rock. And the section south of Cajon Pass has been building even longer. Over 330 years since its last major break. Geologists say the average time between big earthquakes on that section is somewhere around 200 to 300 years. We are already well past that. All of that energy is sitting there, under the ground, right now, under the freeways and the neighborhoods and the shopping centers and the schools. It has not gone anywhere. It has not leaked out. Rock does not forget. It just stores and stores and stores. And the question is not whether it will come out. That part is guaranteed. Geologists are not debating whether the next big earthquake will happen. They are debating what kind it will be. And that question, the one that separates a very large earthquake from something in a completely different category, comes down to one spot. Cajon Pass, the gate. If the next rupture stops there, you get one earthquake on one fault. If it crosses, you get an event that nobody alive has ever experienced, and which one you get has nothing to do with luck. It has to do with physics. Specific, measurable physics that a team just figured out for the first time. And that depends entirely on what is happening inside the gate right now. Section 2, the key that opens the gate. Cajon Pass is where the San Andreas fault and the San Jacinto fault come together, and these are two separate systems. The San Andreas is the famous one, running most of the length of California. The San Jacinto is less well known, but in some ways just as dangerous. It runs south through San Bernardino and Riverside, right underneath some of the fastest growing urban areas in the entire country. At Cajon Pass, these two faults get close to each other. But here's a detail that surprised even the scientists studying it. There is no clean line connecting the two at the surface. You cannot walk out there with a flashlight and trace a crack from one fault onto the other. There is no bridge, no tunnel, no visible path. Whatever connects them is deeper underground, and the scientific papers describe it as a mechanical interaction at depth rather than a single crack. That is exactly why it works like a gate and not like a highway. A rupture coming down one fault cannot smoothly roll onto the other. It has to jump across a gap. Sometimes the jump works, sometimes it dies. Scientists call spots like this conditional barriers. Not walls that always block, not doors that always stay open. Barriers whose behavior changes depending on the conditions at the exact moment a rupture arrives. The question is, what conditions? Figuring that out has been the problem for over a century. Because you cannot see stress, you cannot photograph it, you cannot stick a thermometer into the ground and get a reading of how close the fault is to breaking. The fault just sits there, silent, looking exactly the same whether it is about to go or has another century of quiet ahead of it. So in June 2026, a team led by a scientist named Lilian Burkhardt from the University of Bern and the University of Hawaii published a study that takes a completely different approach. Instead of trying to measure the stress directly, they built a computer model that calculates it. They built a physics-based simulation of how stress builds up and gets released on these faults over time. Not a flat snapshot, a four-dimensional model. 3 dimensions of space, one of time, a full movie of earthquake cycles stretching back 1,000 years. To feed that model, they needed to know when each section of fault had broken in the past, because every past earthquake releases stress and resets the clock on that section. So they assembled a 1,000-year history of ruptures from some genuinely incredible detective work. Other scientists had spent years digging trenches straight across the fault. In those trenches, they could see layers of dirt and sediment. When an earthquake shakes the ground hard enough, it disturbs those layers. It shuffles them, folds them, breaks them. Scientists use radiocarbon dating on organic material trapped in those layers to figure out when the shaking happened. They also studied tree rings from trees that were tilted or damaged by ground movement. The rings grow thicker on one side after a tree gets pushed, and you can count the rings to date when it happened. And for the last couple of hundred years, they had written accounts from the people who were there. Put all of that together, and you get a rough but genuinely useful record of when each section of these faults broke going back about 1,000 years. The model takes that record, adds strain at the rate the plates actually move, which is that fingernail speed we talked about, and subtracts it every time the record says a section broke. Then it runs forward from 1,000 years ago to the present day. What comes out the other end is a number for each section of fault that says, right now, in 2025, this is how much stress is loaded into it. And here's where the study turns into a headline. The model does not just give you a current stress reading, it also calculates a range of stress at which each section has broken in the past. Think of it as a red zone. Every section has its own red zone based on its own history of past earthquakes. When the current stress reaches into that zone, you are in territory where that section has broken before. On the Mojave South section of the San Andreas, the one sitting just north of Cajon Pass, the historical red zone runs from about 1.2 to 2.7 megapascals. A megapascal is just a unit of pressure. The number by itself does not mean much. What matters is the comparison. And the comparison is this. The current stress on that section is 2.8, not near the top of the red zone, past it. On the north San Bernardino section, the one sitting on the other side of the gate, the red zone runs from about 0.4 to 1.6. The current value is 1.8, also past it. And then there is the San Jacinto fault, the second system. Its red zone runs from 1.2 to 2.9. The current stress sitting on it is 3.6. Let that sink in for a second. The red zone tops out at 2.9. The current stress is 3.6. That is not close to the historical range. It is way past it. The highest value the model found in an entire millennium of data. Every single section at that junction is currently loaded beyond the stress levels that produced past earthquakes. All of them. At the same time. The sentence the scientists published is the one that traveled around the world and showed up on the news. Stress levels on multiple fault segments are now at or above the highest values seen in the past 1,000 years. Now, here's where I have to be honest with you in a way that a lot of other videos will not be. Being above the historical red zone does not mean the earthquake is happening next week. Faults are not machines with exact breaking points. The same section of fault has broken at different stress levels at different times in the past. There's no magic number where it has to go. Nobody knows when. Nobody can know when. It could be 5 years. It could be 50. What the study does tell you is that the system has more energy stored in it right now than at any point in the past 1,000 years of records. And here is the finding that is actually more important than any of those numbers. Remember the original mystery? Why did 1857 stop at the gate when 1812 went through? If bigger earthquakes push through more easily, then 1857 should have gone through and 1812 should have stopped. But the opposite happened. So size is clearly not the answer. The answer in this model is stranger. It is not about how much stress is on any one fault. It is about how close all the faults at the junction are to their own breaking points at the same time. Think about it like two people holding heavy boxes. If one person is barely holding on and the other just put their box down and is resting, a small bump will only knock the first person down. The second one is fine. The event stays small. But if both people are barely holding on, both straining, both right at the edge, a bump that knocks one of them will knock the other too. Because they were both already so close to falling that it did not take much. That is how the gate works. It does not open because of force. It opens because of agreement. Both sides of the junction have to be loaded up and close to their own breaking points at the same time. When they are, a rupture arriving from one side finds a neighbor that is already on the edge. The energy transfers. The neighbor breaks too. One earthquake becomes two fault systems moving together. The scientists have a great way of describing this. They call them gate open and gate closed events. In 1812, both sides were loaded, the faults were in agreement, and the gate was open. The rupture went through. In 1857, one side had been partially relieved by the 1812 event and was not as loaded. The faults were out of sync, the gate was closed, the rupture stopped. It is like a lock with a combination. The combination is not one number, it is three numbers that all have to line up at the same time. And when they do, the gate swings open. And that is the deeply uncomfortable truth sitting underneath all of this. Right now, in 2025, all three sections meeting at Cajon Pass are loaded past their own historical breaking points. The Mojave South section is at 2.8, past its ceiling of 2.7. The North San Bernardino section is at 1.8, past its ceiling of 1.6. The San Jacinto section is at 3.6, way past its ceiling of 2.9. All three numbers are past the red zone, all at the same time. The gap between them is small. That is the combination. That is what gate open conditions look like. Not one section in the red zone, all three together. In the model's interpretation, those are exactly the conditions that have produced through-going ruptures in the past. The gate, as far as this model can tell, is currently open. Section 3. If the gate opens, everything in this section is a scenario, not a forecast. The study does not tell you when. It cannot tell you when. What it tells you is what kind of earthquake is physically possible given how the system is loaded right now. And that is worth walking through because this is where geography stops being abstract and starts becoming very real. Start small, not the whole fault at once. Earthquakes never begin everywhere simultaneously. They begin at one spot. A small patch of rock, maybe a few miles across, that has been holding on for centuries, finally loses its grip. The friction gives way, and then the break spreads. The rip moves along the fault at about 2.5 miles per second. Behind it, the ground lurches sideways as decades of stored energy come out all at once. Seismic waves radiate outward from the breaking front. The shaking hits communities one by one as the rupture races past them. Within the first minute, the front reaches Cajon Pass. And this is the moment that decides everything. If the gate stays closed, you get a massive earthquake on the San Andreas. Terrible. Damaging. Very likely the worst earthquake most living Californians have ever experienced. But it is contained to one fault system. The sections south of the pass stay locked with all their stored energy still inside them. The shaking eventually stops. If the gate opens, the earthquake transforms. It stops being just a San Andreas event. The rupture jumps to the San Jacinto fault and keeps going, tearing south through San Bernardino, through Riverside, heading toward the Coachella Valley. Two fault systems, one earthquake, more ground covered, more energy released, more cities hit, shaking that lasts longer and reaches further. And the geography of where that second fault runs is what turns a geological event into a human disaster. In 1857, the earthquake tore through land that was almost completely empty. Desert, open rangeland, scattered military forts, and tiny ranches. The total population of California was around 350,000 people. Almost nobody was near the fault. That is the only reason 1857 is a story about geology instead of a story about catastrophe. Today, over 23 million people live in Southern California. The greater Los Angeles metro area has about 13 million people. The Inland Empire, around San Bernardino and Riverside, is home to nearly 5 million and has been one of the fastest growing parts of the entire country. The same earthquake that went through empty desert in 1857 now goes through a mega region. And if the gate opens, the earthquake takes a longer path through even more of it. The official government planning scenario for a big San Andreas earthquake, called the shakeout scenario, was put together by the USGS and over 300 scientists and engineers. They modeled what a magnitude 7.8 event on the southern fault would look like. Their estimate, around 1,800 deaths, 50,000 injuries, over $200 billion in damage, roughly 255,000 households left with nowhere to go, and about 1,600 large fires sparked by ruptured gas and utility lines, many of which would burn unchecked because the water system needed to fight them would be damaged too. And remember, that scenario is based on a single fault rupture. If the gate opens and both faults go at once, the affected area is larger, the shaking lasts longer, and the damage spreads to areas that the shakeout model did not fully cover. For a rupture this size, the shaking in the hardest hit areas lasts between 1 and 2 minutes. Try standing completely still and counting slowly to 90. 1, 2, 3. Now imagine that the entire time, the floor under you has been shaking, and it is not done. Walls cracking, glass breaking, the noise of a building groaning around you, 90 seconds and counting. But here is the part that most coverage of this study completely missed. And it is arguably the most important part of all. The buildings are not the real problem. The supply lines are. Southern California does not produce enough water for itself. It does not generate enough of its own electricity. It does not grow enough of its own food. The region is fed from the outside through pipes and wires and highways that cross the mountains. And the easiest way through those mountains, the gap that humans found and said, let us build everything through there, is the gap the fault carved. Cajon Pass exists as a route because two faults spent millions of years grinding a hole through the mountain range. The gap is there because the earth broke, and humans looked at that hole, the hole made by the very thing that threatens them, and filled it with everything a modern city needs to survive. There is an irony there that is almost too perfect to be real. The fault built the highway, and the highway is the thing the fault will destroy. Interstate 15, the main highway connecting Los Angeles to Las Vegas and the rest of the country to the east, runs right through Cajon Pass, directly on top of the fault. About 160,000 vehicles a day. Major freight rail lines that carry goods from the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach run through the same gap. Power transmission lines that feed huge parts of the region pass through it. Natural gas pipelines run underneath it. Fuel pipelines run beside it. The California Aqueduct, carrying water that millions of people drink, crosses the fault in this area. One seismologist, Lucy Jones from Caltech, who has been studying this problem for decades, said it plainly. Any lifeline crossing the fault will be cut off. The lead scientist of this study, Liliane Burkhardt, put it in terms anyone can understand. She said that aqueducts actually cross the San Andreas fault, and if something happens, you might not have water for a while. Not water might be expensive. Not water pressure might drop. You might not have water for a city of millions. The southern section of the San Andreas alone crosses 39 pipelines, just on that one stretch. 39 pipes carrying gas, fuel, and water that all run across a fault that has been loading for 168 years. That is the part that should get everyone's attention. A rupture at Cajon Pass does not just shake the ground. It physically cuts several of the supply lines that Los Angeles and the surrounding cities depend on for basic survival. Water, power, gas, fuel, the highway, the rail line, all damaged at the same moment in the same few miles of ground. And these are not systems you can fix in a day. A broken water main on your street can be patched in hours. An aqueduct that has been ripped apart by the ground, lurching 30 feet sideways, is a different kind of problem. Engineers have estimated that restoring full water service after a major San Andreas rupture could take weeks to months, not days, weeks. Think about what that means for a city of millions. On day 1, the ground shakes and the buildings are the story. On day 3, the water is the story. On day 10, people who were not hurt by the earthquake at all are now in trouble because the supply chains are broken and no one can get to them. The buildings are what the cameras show. The lifelines are what decide whether the aftermath lasts weeks or months, whether ambulances can get through on roads that might be buckled or blocked by landslides, whether hospitals can keep running without power or water, whether firefighters have enough pressure to fight the fires that broken gas lines will start across the region, whether 13 million people in the LA metro area have clean drinking water by day 3. Southern California has known about this problem for decades. Reports have been written, studies have been done, some things have been upgraded. The region's biggest power company, Southern California Edison, has spent around $300 million on earthquake hardening over the past decade. The gas company has put automatic shutoff valves on pipelines at Cajon Pass. Some bridges have been retrofitted. But fully reinforcing everything that crosses the fault is enormously expensive. And it competes for money with things that are on fire today, problems that are happening right now, versus something that will happen in an unknown year. That is the dilemma at the center of all of this. The earthquake is certain, the timing is not, and humans are not good at spending money to prepare for certain events that have no date attached to them. So what does this study actually change? Burkhardt was asked directly what her model means, and she drew a very clear line between what it says and what it does not say. She said this is not a prediction of when an earthquake will happen. She said the system is critically stressed, and models like this one give a clearer picture of the range of scenarios to prepare for. That is the whole ballgame. The model tells you how much energy is loaded into the system and which arrangements of that energy have historically produced the worst case outcome. It does not tell you when. Whether the next one happens in 6 months or in 60 years is outside what any method can answer. And the scientists are honest about that. They do not claim otherwise. There's also a real limit in the method itself. The whole thing rests on a 1,000-year earthquake history assembled from dirt layers and tree rings. That record is impressive, but it has gaps. There are earthquakes that probably happened, but left no trace anyone has found yet. Change some of the assumptions and the numbers shift. Feed the model a slightly different history and the stress readings come out a little different. The scientists are open about this. These are ranges, not exact values. Scenarios, not countdown clocks. And there is a version of this story that gets told very badly, and it is worth naming because you will see it. Every few years, someone takes a study like this one and turns it into an "it is coming any day now" warning. The headlines scream. The news channels run scary graphics. People get nervous. And then the year passes with nothing happening. And the public, very reasonably, decides the scientists were crying wolf. That does real damage. Not to scientists, to regular people. Because the next time money needs to be spent reinforcing a water pipe or strengthening a bridge or upgrading a power line that crosses the fault, voters and politicians remember the last false alarm and say, "We have more urgent things to spend on. The earthquake did not come. Why would it come now?" And the tragic part is, the earthquake is a certainty. It is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. Every serious scientist agrees on that. The timing is uncertain. The event itself is not. The fault will break. The only questions are when and how big, and whether the things in its path were built to handle it. So what would actually make the picture clearer over time? Not prediction. Nobody serious is trying to tell you the exact date. The field largely gave up on that goal decades ago, because earthquakes are genuinely unpredictable at the level of specific timing. What scientists are working on instead is narrower and far more useful. Better records of past earthquakes. That means more trenches dug across the fault to find and date more ancient ruptures. Every new data point sharpens the model. Better measurements of how the ground is moving right now. Satellites can detect tiny changes in the shape of the ground from space down to fractions of an inch. Dense networks of ground sensors can track strain building up in real time. Those measurements test whether the model matches what is actually happening in the real world. And better understanding of how fault junctions work, which is exactly what this paper contributes. The earthquake gate idea, the finding that what matters is not the total force, but the agreement of stress on both sides of the junction, is a genuinely new insight. It does not tell you when, but it tells you what to prepare for. But here's the thing that matters more than any number in this entire study. There is a version of this future where the gate opens, and the outcome is measured in disruption rather than in death, where the water pipes were reinforced before it happened, where the power grid was built to handle it, where the freeway bridges flex instead of collapse, where hospitals have backup power and backup water. That version does not depend on geology. Geology does not care about us. It depends on decisions made by people with budgets, years and decades in advance, for an event with no date on it. Go back to 1857 one more time. A rupture over 200 miles long came roaring down the fault. It hit Cajon Pass and stopped. Nobody knows how close it came to going through. That is not a figure of speech. There is literally no way to know after the fact how close a rupture came to jumping a gap that it failed to jump. Maybe it was close. Maybe it was not. We will never know. What we do know is that everything it did not release is still there. That the sections on both sides of the junction have been loading for over a century and a half. That all three of the sections meeting at the gate are now past the stress levels that produced past earthquakes. And that the conditions look like the conditions that historically opened the gate. The fault is not waiting for anything. It has no schedule. It has no plan. It has no intention. It is just two pieces of the planet sliding past each other at the speed your fingernails grow. And every single day, the stick bends a little further. Every day, a little more energy goes in and none comes out. The only real question is which side of the gate the next one ends on, and whether, when that day comes, the things that crossed the fault were built to survive it. That is the story of the earthquake gate. And here's the part that should sit with you after this video ends. The fault does not care if you are ready. It does not send warnings. It does not check your calendar. It does not wait for a convenient time. It just breaks. And then everything you did or did not do before that moment is the only thing that matters. The difference between a family that gets through something like this and a family that does not almost always comes down to one thing: what they did before it happened. Not during, not after. Before. That is why I built the Family Disaster Survival System. It is not a list of tips. It is a complete step-by-step plan. How much water you actually need per person and how to store it. How to communicate with your family when every cell tower in the region is down. What to do in the first 72 hours when no one is coming to help. How to evacuate when the roads are blocked. How to keep your kids calm and safe when the world around them does not feel safe anymore. Everything. If you watch this whole video, you already know more about what is coming than most people ever will, but knowing is not the same as being ready. The link to the guide is in the description and pinned in the top comment. Go grab it right now. Do not be the person who watches this video, nods, and then does nothing. Now, here's my question for the comments. After watching this, what is the one thing you're going to do this week to get your family more prepared? Not next month, not eventually. This week. Drop it below. I read every comment. And if you want to go even deeper, we made a whole video about the fault sitting in the middle of the country, 1,000 miles from any plate boundary, that has no business existing and once produced 3 earthquakes so strong they rang church bells in Boston. That one is right here. I will see you there.